Come Lie With Me is the 12th episode of the third season of Frasier. This is directed by Philip Charles MacKenzie, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode. It's a really brilliant episode, particularly with some great Daphne moments, with some great moments between Martin and Frasier. And sometimes when I discuss Frasier, I will discuss each part of the narrative in chunks. Sometimes I'll go through it chronologically, and I'm going to go with the latter on this occasion, as we really just have one main overarching narrative. We do have a story with Niles, and I'll talk about Niles as and when necessary. The story with Niles is not the most interesting, but it's decent enough filler. It actually starts off with Daphne waking up in bed with her boyfriend Joe. He's played by Tony Carreiro, and Daphne panics because she was supposed to get Joe out of the house before Frasier and Martin woke up. The implication there is that she doesn't want them to know he's been in her bed and that they've been sleeping together in Frasier's apartment. And that concern is not unrealistic when we find out how Frasier reacts. Things don't go according to plan, though. As soon as she opens the door, Eddie comes in and steals Joe's underwear, and she tries to get Frasier and Martin to hurry up with their breakfast and leave the apartment so that she can then sneak Joe out. And unfortunately, Frasier does catch them, and it's her own fault, to be fair. They would have got away with it had they not stopped to kiss. If she just ushered him out immediately, she would have got away with it. But nevertheless, we have this awkward moment, but brilliantly executed, where Frasier and Martin do see them, and Frasier says something to the effect of, "Nothing could make this more awkward," and Eddie comes along and deposits Joe's underwear at his feet. It's a delightful way to start things off. Very clearly, we have the narrative established. It's a really great opening. We then get the second part of the narrative established when Frasier meets Niles, and Niles says that he didn't receive an invitation to a particular function. And normally he would have been invited, and he worries that now he's separated from Maris, this is basically the end of his social life. And we move on from that for just now. We do come back to it in a bit. Frasier then discusses his problem with Roz, and Roz is 100% correct. Frasier is 100% not correct, because he tells Roz that he's going to have to tell Daphne he doesn't want her sleeping with Joe under his roof. And on the one hand, I can understand you not wanting to imagine somebody sleeping with somebody else. That's completely understandable. But Daphne lives there. It's not like she's a temporary guest and this is a temporary thing she'll have to abstain from for Frasier's benefit. But when somebody actually lives in that house, in that apartment, I don't think it's fair to dictate things like that. Roz tells Frasier this. I think we have two very opposing opinions here. And unfortunately, Roz's opinion that Frasier is not going about this the right way didn't really get through to him. And we have a brilliantly executed scene with Frasier and Daphne where Frasier confronts her, and Daphne's response to everything he says is brilliant, very well written, and she ultimately says that she'll just move out and she solves the problem. And from her perspective, it actually does seem like a great solution, because she won't feel awkward bringing Joe over, and Frasier won't feel awkward imagining things, and she's actually going away with Joe for the weekend. And what I really liked about this, it's something that happens at the end, actually, that I'll talk about when we get there. But despite the fact that this is all about Daphne and how she feels about things and how unfairly Frasier is clearly treating her, she's not actually in the episode very much, because, as I said, she is away for the weekend with Joe. But something happens later on that I think is really important and helps to show that even though she wasn't in the episode, it is definitely all about how important she is as a character and how important she is to Frasier and Martin. While she's away, we actually see Martin walking around in his underwear. He sings a little bit of "She's Just a Groovy Lady," which I rather enjoyed. But before we know it, Frasier and Martin are bickering. They're arguing, and things just get a little bit out of hand. And then Niles comes over, and he's dressed in a cowboy hat, and he worries he's a social outcast. And Martin, to his credit, does say that he just thinks Niles wasn't invited because they're worried it would upset him to see Maris. Martin was very tactful. Frasier, yet again, did not really understand how to think of other people's feelings and said things that basically contradicted what Martin said. Frasier, I love him in this. The performance is brilliant, of course, but his personality in this episode is not very likeable. Were this to be the first Frasier episode somebody watched, I don't think the character would come across very well at all. Martin and Frasier then continue arguing, and it gets louder and louder, and they're rushing around the house, turning lights on, and it's all really chaotic. And then finally, while they're having this argument, Daphne comes home, and in the space of about 10 or 15 seconds, she rectifies all of the chaos that Martin and Frasier had caused. And in those 10 or 15 seconds, it very clearly showed that Daphne was so important to that household, and that even if she wasn't in the episode, we can definitely see that she is integral to the structure of the apartment, to the way things are run. And as Martin points out, she is the stuffing in the Oreo that holds them together. And considering the stuff in Oreo is the best part, in my opinion, I rather like that comparison. But it made perfect sense. She's the soft, creamy bit in the middle, and they're the tough exterior that need to have a bit of separation, with Daphne holding them firmly together. And I rather enjoyed that quite a lot. And I'm sure if I have any Oreos anytime soon, I will think of Daphne when I do so. And things get even more interesting because Daphne decides to lie, and I think Frasier knew it was a lie. It was more of a white lie than an outright lie, but Frasier goes to her and says, look, you need to stay, we need you, please don't leave us. And Daphne reassures him that nothing untoward will be happening because Joe can't perform that way. They can't make love in a traditional way. And this is because he had a war issue when he was staying at his parents' British summer house during the Falkland Islands, because he was kicked by a sheep that was spooked by an air raid siren. Very, very creative, very entertaining, and a nice way to just kind of brush everything under the rug. Frasier can now pretend that nothing's going on. Daphne can now feel like Frasier won't be thinking of them. And I thought it was a very creative way to solve the problem that was, in general, giving everybody the best of all worlds. And I really liked it. Unfortunately, I found the last couple of minutes of the episode to be really flat. Martin made a comment about reduced fat Oreos, and Niles had just come out saying his invitation had been eaten by a dog, which was fine, but not most interesting. Martin then makes the Oreo comment, and then over the closing credits, we see Daphne pouring 3 cups of juice. Now, I will say I didn't find it the most interesting ending, but it was quite clever because we assume, with Martin and Frasier standing behind her, we assume that she's pouring the juice for them, but actually she scoops all of the cups together and takes them back to her bedroom, with the obvious implication that certain people need to replenish and rehydrate. And it was fine. It was not my favourite way to end things. The last few minutes were definitely a little bit dull compared to some episodes, but nevertheless, it wasn't too bad. And ultimately, I did like this episode. Come Lie With Me is still a great episode. I think there's some food for thought here. If anybody has a similar attitude to Frasier, maybe think about how other people feel. There's definitely a great message about respect here, both in terms of respect towards Daphne and respect between Martin and Frasier, which definitely didn't exist. So, all things considered, Come Lie With Me is a really good episode.